Welcome back to Talent Hub Talk. Today, I am recording an episode that I think is important right now in the market. It's around potential red flags with Salesforce candidates. And I think really this could be useful for people in hiring positions, people that are building Salesforce teams, or anyone that's just got an interest in some of the things that are happening in the market right now. I recently put a LinkedIn post up about people having multiple jobs at one time. So if you haven't seen that, basically, I've heard some stories recently around people that are holding two different positions at one time, where each of their hiring companies feel that they've got the kind of full commitment from that person for the 8 hours per day. This shouldn't be confused for freelancing, where a freelancing engagement can mean, that there's no, commitment for ongoing work with a customer. You're delivering a set piece of work in your own time, can be done at any time, and you can have multiple freelance clients at once. I'm not referring to this. What I'm referring to is like a daily rate contract or even a permanent role where you're ultimately paid to be working for a set number of hours per day, often during core business hours. And the expectation from the company that have hired you is that you're fully committed to them during that time. What I've seen happen, unfortunately, quite a few times over the years is where people are actually running two different jobs at one time, kind of bouncing between tasks for the different companies, being paid either two salaries or two daily rates. So earning substantial money, but ultimately not doing that in a way that is transparent and fair on the companies that are employing them. So I posted around that I'd heard about some more examples of this, and then even more examples came out in the woodwork. I was contacted by hiring managers from different companies to say that they'd actually been burnt by similar situations recently. So I thought it was worthwhile recording a podcast on this topic, more so on potential red flags that I've seen over my experience of close to 10 years in Salesforce recruitment now. Not necessarily just focusing on people having two jobs, but more around some of the red flags that I've noticed, trends around where people are perhaps fabricating their experience or telling white lies around the depth or breadth of their Salesforce experience, and things I've noticed that pop up quite regularly. There's definitely a pattern to some of these things that I've noticed. So I thought it'd be worthwhile sharing my experience in this space. One thing I definitely want to say up front is that I'm not saying all of these things are necessarily causes for major concern if you see them on a candidate's CV, or I think you need to go into these things with not expecting everyone to be fabricating experience, giving people the benefit of doubt to a degree. And I don't go into every conversation with a candidate looking to establish any, bad practices, but there's definitely things I've noticed. And I think, sometimes there can be some extra investigation needed if any of these trends come up. But what I'm not saying is that if anyone has, I don't think that each of the points I'm going to make are on their own and necessarily massive red flags that should stop you from hiring a candidate. They're just things that potentially should be investigated further if they pop up. So on the topic of people having multiple jobs at once, it's actually really, really difficult to know if this is happening. I think a lot of the time when it comes to light that someone does have more than one job, it's just fortunate for the companies that have identified it because of circumstances that pop up. There's no real way 100% sure of knowing that someone may be running two jobs. Sometimes it can crop up because of the candidates having made a mistake in terms of sharing something they shouldn't have shared, sending a document that wasn't meant to be sent to one company, and it highlights the fact that they potentially are working for another company at the same time. Really, that's one of the only real ways of knowing for sure that something's going on. And then that does still require some further investigation. But some of the things that potentially would indicate or give some sort of reason to investigate further, again, these aren't foolproof. Not every single one of these means that a candidate is working somewhere else. It's just things I've noticed over time that sometimes mean that someone, potentially is doing something they shouldn't be. So the first one is not logging into Salesforce regularly. And I had a contractor several years ago that was let go from a contract because they'd put in a timesheet for 5 days per week regularly, and the company had logged into Salesforce or checked when the candidate was logging into Salesforce, and they weren't logging in anywhere near 5 days per week. that was a sign that potentially they were kind of balancing tasks with this particular contract with another contract. So that's one way, checking how regularly someone is logging into Salesforce and logging in to do some work in Salesforce is a definite way of just seeing if there's any causes for concern with the work that someone is doing. Lack of availability for meetings, again, on its own isn't a problem, but if someone is constantly unable to make meetings, pulling out of meetings last minute, I'm not suggesting people don't have commitments outside of being available for meetings. So obviously, like I said, it's not, this on its own isn't a reason to say someone's working another contract. But yeah, if people can't make meetings regularly during the hours that you would expect them to be available, potentially, let's say 9 to 5, if they obviously not expecting people to not have lunch breaks or things like that as well. But yeah, just if you're noticing trends around someone not being available for meetings, cancelling meetings, not available during working hours to jump on things, that might be something you want to kind of investigate further. Missing deadlines is another one. If people are balancing two jobs at once, there's potential for them missing deadlines. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for. Obviously, that could be for many reasons they're missing deadlines, but that's just another thing that we've seen for people that are balancing two jobs at once. They're not always able to meet deadlines in both roles. And then another one that definitely doesn't mean someone is up to no good, but is something that potentially be a reason they wouldn't do this if they had two roles, is they're not updating their LinkedIn jobs regularly. Obviously, if they're working for two companies, they're not going to have them both on their LinkedIn profile at once. So if you do have some concerns around, worrying that someone might be doing more than one job at one time, maybe have a quick look on LinkedIn to see where it says they're working. If your company isn't on there, it might be because they're working somewhere else and they wouldn't want to alert that other company to the fact that they're working at your organization as well. Funnily enough, I did hear of a candidate that did have two jobs on their LinkedIn at once, and they were actually working two jobs at once. They didn't understand that there was actually a problem with that because they were meeting the outcomes of both jobs and meeting the expectations of both clients. So some people will have both jobs on their LinkedIn profile. Most won't, because I think most go into it knowing that actually it's not something that either company would be comfortable with. So there'll be an element of deceit there and not wanting to publicize the fact that they're obviously working two jobs. So yeah, like I said, it's really, really difficult to know if someone is working two jobs. Sometimes you just find out by chance. Sometimes there are some little clues along the way. Like I said, if someone is missing deadlines, doesn't necessarily mean they're performing two jobs. It's just that can be one of the things that shows when people are doing more than one job at once. Also, the quality of work. Sometimes I've heard stories about people having two jobs and pushing some of the tasks of one job to another person to get done. So if you see differences in quality of work, sometimes the work's good, sometimes it's not so good, that could be an indication that there's something to investigate. So yeah, like I said, really difficult to know for sure, but these are just some of the breadcrumbs that you might look out for if you're concerned that someone might be performing two jobs at once. And then some of the other things I wanted to highlight aren't so much around people doing two jobs, but over the years, we've seen more and more candidates wanting to come into the Salesforce market. We all know that over the years, Salesforce themselves have spoken about the amount of opportunity in the Salesforce space. It's well known that salaries have been high in the Salesforce ecosystem. So I've definitely seen more and more people wanting to get their foot into the ecosystem. And some of them, many of them, go about it in the right way, upskilling, going on Trailhead, getting mentors, going through the process of upskilling and learning and growing their skill set. Unfortunately, some people do take shortcuts. So yeah, whereas obviously I would say a very, very big percentage of people do things the right way, and there's a very small percentage of people that don't, and they cut corners, they fabricate experience. They say they've done things they haven't. And yeah, unfortunately, these people do exist. They are out there. They are getting hired into roles by companies that aren't very thorough in their recruitment process. And for me, there are some red flags that I've noticed over the years, some trends that I just want to bring to people's attention. Again, not saying all of these mean that someone has fabricated experience, and there's a story for everything. I think it's just if you're noticing some of these things, it might be worth some further investigation. So the first one I'll highlight is on their CV, lots of certifications, but then you go looking for them on the Trailblazer verification site and there's no way of finding them. Their email address isn't linked to the Trailblazer site. Again, it could be because they've got another email address. But if it isn't, and that's their own email address, and they haven't, there's no way of verifying their certifications on verification site, then that is for me a cause for concern. And it's definitely something to investigate with them. I often ask people, like, I've not been able to verify your certs on this page. What email address is linked to your certifications? Often, when I ask that question and they can't tell me another email address to try, they often say that their certs have lapsed. So that's just definitely something to look out for. People that are saying they've either got certs now or have had certs in the past, but there's no way of verifying that they have had them. That's definitely something just to keep an eye out for. The other thing around certs that I've noticed is that often people on their CV will say they have many years of experience, many years of Salesforce experience. So let's give an example saying someone has 10 years Salesforce experience as a developer, but all of their certifications were achieved in a very short window of time very recently. I've seen this quite often with people that have moved to Australia or New Zealand recently. It will say on their CV that they've been working with Salesforce for many years, but I'll notice that just before they moved to Australia or just after they moved to Australia, they got, 3 or 4 different Salesforce certifications, and they'd never had any Salesforce certifications before that. This can actually be very easily explained if someone just felt that, I was moving to a new country, I'd heard that certs are important, and that's why I got certified. But over the years, I've noticed, and some of the people that I've seen that have fabricated experience in the past have got certs recently, didn't have any interest in them in the past because they didn't have Salesforce experience at that time. So, it's a difficult one to say for sure if someone have just got certs in a short window of time that they're doing something wrong. I'm not necessarily saying that's always the case. All I'm saying is I have seen trends where people get certs, say they were experienced for a long period of time before getting the certs, but then in reality, they're actually working in a different technology prior to moving to Australia or New Zealand. And then they've gone out and got certs to be able to then say, well, I've had all of this experience for many years. And in some cases, it's been proven that they didn't have experience prior to moving, and they've got certs just to try and kind of cover that up. So that's something, again, not everyone that goes out and gets lots of certs in a short window of time is doing something wrong. I'm just trying to highlight some of the trends I've seen where people are fabricating experience. This is something I've noticed people doing. Another thing is when you go back through people's CVs, there's Salesforce products with companies that doesn't really make sense. So one example of this is people saying they've worked on a government department project and they were implementing Sales Cloud as an example. Now, I'm not saying there's no government department in the world that has Sales Cloud, but it's just something I've noticed. Like in my experience, a lot of government departments will be using Service Cloud, Experience Cloud, Salesforce Industries. Not too many of them, from my experience, have been using Sales Cloud. It's just something that I've noticed. Government is just one example of this, but when you actually go back and you speak to people about the work they've done in previous roles, sometimes they can't really explain how a product or how a Salesforce Cloud was used in a particular environment. Yeah, when you actually go through their CV and you ask them not about their most recent role, but you start inquiring about roles 2 or 3 roles prior, ask them how Salesforce was used by that company. And often they haven't actually kind of planned that someone would ask them questions about roles from several years back. And they can't answer questions around, how Experience Cloud was used at a certain company, or, why a company used Service Cloud and how the business used that. They only really prepare for the most recent role, thinking they'll only be asked questions on that one. So it's really important when you are looking at someone's CV that you dig a little bit deeper than the most recent role and actually ask them to articulate how Salesforce was used in previous roles, because I feel that trips a lot of people up when they actually have made up that experience or someone has made it up for them on their CV. Another thing with CVs, when you go back and look at someone's profile and you look at what they were doing 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and they've said that they were working with Salesforce. Sometimes some of the technologies mentioned in their CV in roles prior, so looking back 5 or 6 years, they mentioned technology that wasn't actually available at that time, and that's because they've written the CV now or written it recently, so they're using their current knowledge of what's available from Salesforce, not knowing that the technology that they're listing for roles that they were performing many years ago, the technology wasn't available. And that's something definitely to look out for as well. Another thing is companies that don't actually have Salesforce appearing on CVs. So I've seen trends of this where people that have fabricated their experience, they list a company on their CV that actually don't. I've gone and done some further research. They actually don't have Salesforce. I see the same companies popping up again and again in this case, and I feel like there must be someone that's giving this information, someone that's writing the CVs for them, a group that's maybe getting people together and maybe upskilling them on Salesforce, but giving them stories around, companies that they can say they've worked for, and maybe they've got like I don't know, maybe a reference within those companies that they can use, even though they've never actually worked there. There might be someone that they're linked to at these companies. But yeah, there are definitely trends that I notice around certain companies appearing on CVs when actually they don't even use Salesforce internally. So that's something to look out for as well. And then a really interesting one with CVs is roles that just don't make any sense. So I saw one recently where a Salesforce professional said that they were working for one of the big Salesforce consulting businesses in Australia, but they were working on a US based project. Now, this is a big global systems integrator who have Salesforce professionals all over the world, and they have people working in the US. That in itself isn't, it's not a red flag for everyone. There are definitely some Salesforce partners here in Australia where team members would be working on projects out of the US. I can think of at least one or two companies in that space. This one, though, I know the client really well. I've done a lot of work with this particular consulting firm. So when I saw that the candidate said they were working for this partner, but working on a US based project, it didn't make any sense to me. So I pushed them a bit further on that, started asking them some questions. They got really flustered. At one point, they hung up on me. I asked who they'd worked with there. They gave me a manager's name I'd never heard of, which is quite strange because I do a lot of work with this company. And they actually then went on to block my number because I think they realized they'd been found out. So, yeah, I think just when you're reviewing a CV, reviewing a profile, just try and work out how much sense does it make that what the candidate's saying they did is actually realistic. If you have got someone saying they worked on a US based project from here, just dig a little bit deeper, find out who the reporting lines were for. If you are going to hire this person, can you get a reference from the local team here in Australia? It's really important that obviously references are coming from people that have worked there, ideally with a current company email address, not just taking references from people that have said they've worked for the company before but aren't there any longer, because that's easier to cover up, obviously. So yeah, just use some kind of market information that you may have, and just what are your spider senses telling you about what the candidate says on their profile, and how realistic is that? Another one that really confuses me is when someone says they've worked for a company, and then I go through their LinkedIn connections and they're not connected to any single person from that company. If you've worked for a company, you would imagine that at some time you're going to connect with at least one person from that business on LinkedIn. I'm struggling to think of a company I've ever worked for where I've not gone on to connect with someone that I work with, whether that's a peer, a manager. So yeah, that always rings alarm bells for me if someone's saying that they are working or they have worked at a company, but there's no sign of them being connected to anyone at that company on LinkedIn. That's definitely something that I would want to investigate further. I'm not saying this is a reason not to hire a candidate. I'm just saying this is another thing that you should be investigating, because, yeah, it's really important that you as a hiring manager are looking out for some of these things and making sure that people are being hired for their expertise and not for things they're saying they've done that they haven't. I'd welcome any comments on this. I'm happy to help in any way I can. If you want to hear more about some of the things I look out for, or want to inquire as how I go about certain things, or why some of these are red flags, then obviously very happy to hear from you. And hopefully this helps with making sure that anyone you are hiring into your team is the right person for the role and is credible. Thank you very much.